I think that Michel sounds like an awful lot like he could be a professor, even though it sounds like he was denied that opportunity. Well, I'm pleased to be here. So before me, you heard two people really talk about creating something from nothing, right? So imagining something that hasn't been there before. Now, I'll stand before you and talk about the process of commercialization, which I think Jason reduced to money, 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 and I will do my best to convince you that venture capital is slightly more than just money, money, money. I'm going to do it with an example. So Jason mentioned Perplexity. Let me see a show of hands. Who's familiar with Perplexity, has used Perplexity? Okay, good. I see some in the back. I know we have some Khazanah power users. So Perplexity is an answer engine. So I think we've all been conditioned with Google to expect links to navigate the internet when we're seeking an answer, when we're asking a question. Now, Perplexity is trying to rewire us. So instead of seeking links to navigate to an answer, Perplexity is trying to just give you the answer. So my story with Perplexity starts. It was a Friday, San Francisco. I had a 2 o'clock meeting scheduled with the CEO. The CEO is by the name of Arvind. You don't really know on any given day what day you're going to meet some founder that you want to invest in. So that morning, I thought nothing of it being Friday. So my 2 o'clock meeting with Arvind, it was scheduled to be 30 minutes. 30 minutes became 60. It became an hour and a half. It became 2 hours. And what happened is we just sort of meandered. We talked about various things. He was very open to answering my bazillions of questions. And at the end, I found myself convinced. I really honestly can't tell you why exactly, but I grew up in sales, and you learn in sales that what's the point of the meeting? The point of the meeting is not to get information. The point of the meeting is get the next meeting. And so when I left that meeting on Friday, I said, Arvind, will you present to our partnership next Thursday? He didn't want to say no, so he said yes, luckily. So I left. On the train home, I emailed my team. I'm like, we got to scramble on Perplexity. We need to go to IC on Monday and talk about Perplexity, and we have the team coming in to present next Thursday. Let's see. And so here, we wrote this memo over the weekend. As you can see, so this is like a legit excerpt from our memo. As you can see, we couldn't really figure it out, right? We said we don't really know right now, but we know it's working. We were starting to look at the data, and the data was looking pretty good, but we still couldn't figure it out. So the first set of questions was sort of like, is it working? Why is it working? But then the more important second set of questions is it worth it? Is this going to be a big enough market? Are they going to reach a big enough population? I remember we were sitting there, sort of quieted down, and then one of my partners, Steve, he was like, what if it works? And what he meant by that was, Perplexity, it's language agnostic. It could reach every consumer globally, including the 35 million Malaysian population. Maybe not the babies, but whatever. And so his point was like, if this works, it could really, really work in a way that we look at cybersecurity companies and healthcare and fintech, and sometimes they are limited to a smaller market or a smaller demographic. So this was the data we were looking at. This was last October. So they had, it was just starting to work. June, July was somewhat unremarkable, and from August to September, this is what we were looking at. And that is kind of what we were focused on. We were focused on this moment of inflection where it's starting to work. Do we believe? And to fast forward a little bit, so Arvind was on CNBC last week, September. And this is trying to prove the point of like entropy, an object in motion, stage in motion. And if you look at the number of questions posed in September relative to last year, the idea is like they're accelerating and it's really continuing to work. Now, I think if Jason had his way, I would now tell you like all the secrets, like why did we think that Perplexity was going to be the next hot thing, and like why did we invest in the Series B? Let me give you one more example, and then I will try to distill sort of what we're looking for. So here's another example. This is a healthcare technology company based on the East Coast. They are trying to take what is a clinician and a patient interaction, right, a spoken interaction, and then they're going to make clinical notes from that and sort of kick off a workflow. Now, the font is really small, but in here they're talking about like diabetes and metformin and blood pressure levels between 100 and 150, some medicine called simvastatin. I mean, it's a language I can't speak. But with the advent of technology and large language models, you can actually train models on this exact vernacular. I mean, frankly, listening to Michel, I think I need a model trained on his vernacular so that I can understand what Michel is talking about with nuclear fusion. So a bridge, same thing. Like, Q1, Q2 last year, unremarkable. Q3, something starting to work. Q4 is like, okay, now they're at 4 million in ARR, which is, we can call it revenue. So this is what we were looking at. This is like, okay, Q3, Q4, we were deciding on this investment in, call it November, December last year. So you could look at those two companies, you can say, oh, it's like super lucky, coincidence. But IBP invested in both of these companies sort of at that moment where things were starting to work. And you know, Razlan, who started, he started his presentation with talking about why now? Like, what's the why behind going to the moon and going to space? And the same thing is true here. We spend a ton of time thinking about the why. Like, what has changed to make Perplexity capable of having this hockey stick? What has changed for Abridge to have this hockey stick? And you know, spoiler alert, both Perplexity and Abridge are between 50 and 100 million in ARR today, and you saw their numbers, 2.8 and 4.6 million in ARR in Q4 last year. So something's really starting to work. And I think spending time with a lot of you in the audience over the last couple of days, and also hearing a lot of the speakers and the Prime Minister this morning, there's a lot of emphasis on sort of like innovation in Malaysia, and like, how do we jumpstart innovation in Malaysia? Well, we wouldn't have spent so much time thinking about it if it were an easy problem, right? If jumpstarting innovation were in Malaysia were down to this like 1, 2, 3 framework, then we would have just done 1, 2, and 3 by now. And the same thing with these companies. It's not, you can't just like engineer a spark such that this company is going to be successful. You kind of have to like root it in a space and time. Okay, so ChatGPT was the space and time for Perplexity and Abridge, right? There's a theme, I guess, Q4. So Q4 2022, as opposed to Q4 last year and now, ChatGPT launched. And that was like the key magical moment, right? That was the huge unlock of a new technology, that being large language models, foundation models. And with that, then you saw this like Precambrian explosion of OpenAI and Mistral and Facebook, Meta, all of them just putting an exorbitant amount of energy into building these large language models. And then you're starting to see some of these companies are going more mainstream, right? So ChatGPT, extremely mainstream. You know, by artistic license, I put Perplexity into mainstream. Same with Claude. And this is the key why now, right? Like, Perplexity couldn't have done what they do, which is generate answers, before large language models, right? Because what's doing the heavy lifting for the answers? Well, the large language models are actually generating generative AI. They're writing the answers. Same thing with Abridge. I mean, I think with Abridge, we've always had voice translation, voice transcription, dictation. Like, those technologies have been around for a long time. But the unique lexicon of doctor speak, you know, talking about metformin and simvastatin, those had to be trained on specifically trained large language models such that a bridge could exist. So, like, who am I to talk about this? I was on the earlier panel, so you might have heard, but we have been doing this for 44 years, right? Investing in Series B and Series C startups and companies in the Silicon Valley and Europe. And our reason to exist is to invest at that like inflection point, that magical moment of these companies, and then stick with them through the public market. So we've had, you know, 130 plus IPOs since inception. Unfortunately for all the allocators in the room, you know, we've had fewer exits in the last year or two, but hopefully those will come back in due course. And I think having lived through various cycles, I think has actually really helped us. I think if we were, you know, we're investing out of Fund 18. I think if we were investing out of our first fund right now, and we are experiencing, one second. And if AI were sort of the first phase that we had lived through, I think we'd be a little skittish on like, how do you deploy money? I think instead we've lived through PCs, web, mobile, cloud, AI. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through sort of like 5 examples from previous phases, so from mobile, cloud, and AI. And then we can really zoom out and say, like, what are we thinking about for AI? What are we looking for? And then I have a little secret at the end. So Glossier, some of you may know. There was the question earlier about sort of millennials and Gen Z. So Glossier is an online direct-to-consumer beauty brand, skincare beauty. Well, two things had to change for Glossier to be successful, right? The mobile phone had to be launched, and social media had to be super prolific. Because what they did, which was novel in 2014, which is not novel now, but they built a global community, direct to consumer, and they did that through social media, through influencers, and then user-generated content. Right, but if you think before Glossier, it was like Estee Lauder and Lancome, and those were sold through department stores. So this was, the big unlock. What was the why now? The why now was mobile and social media. Next, CrowdStrike. Maybe doing less well in the news right now, but still a remarkable company. So CrowdStrike, what changed? And we have a security expert coming on right after me. What changed for CrowdStrike? Well, endpoints, right? Mobile phones became a new endpoint. We are used to laptops and servers, but then enter mobile phones. That changed. CrowdStrike is in the space of endpoint detection and response, so new endpoints. Right, then the other thing was essentially like AI 1.0. People were very used to McAfee and Symantec, which is antivirus, which is very like static, non-dynamic, static. And so enter CrowdStrike, and so you have a new endpoint, and then you also have this dynamic, like sort of progressive ongoing protection. So CrowdStrike, it was once almost a $100 billion company, but it's easily more than a $50 billion company today. Okay, Coinbase. You guys might all know Coinbase, consumer company. But what needed to change for Coinbase? Mobile, right? Everyone needed to have a phone in their pocket, because if you're going to buy, sell, store, transact, trade, if you're going to do all that, you need to do it on your phone in your pocket, not on your laptop. And then Bitcoin, of course, with Satoshi. So those were the two sort of like key why nows. So move forward to cloud, so the next big revolution, and then we'll get to AI, but cloud. So Datadog, people are probably familiar, $35, $40 billion company in the States today. Cloud became a new vector that you needed to monitor and track, hence simplified cloud monitoring. I think the other thing is a whole new persona came to exist with the cloud. So I think if you were a VP of engineering at Petronas, you were used to approving all budget for all cyber, all infrastructure, all IT. Datadog completely turned that on its end and said, well, with cloud, we can just appeal directly to the developer. And so they had a very developer-led motion. And I mean, Datadog early days, the average selling price was like $10K, $10,000, where usually, a CrowdStrike might be selling a $2 million, $10 million account. And so they turned that on their head. So what was different for Datadog was like the cloud product and then the developer as the entry point. Lastly, Slack. I guess as some of you guys use Slack, especially now that it's been acquired. Slack was originally not even started as a communications company. The founders started a gaming company, and they realized that they needed a better enterprise solution for communication, right? Because we had all, like the consumerization of enterprise, like we all had WhatsApp and messaging and all these other quick, easy chat functions, and everyone wanted that for the enterprise. Okay, so now AI. So now you guys want to know sort of like what do we have in our minds as we think about AI companies, and what should we be looking for, right? Like what will make something go from probable to possible? What's more likely to make something go from probable to possible? Okay, so here are 5 things that I've sort of, like as a firm, we've been thinking about. So we talked about large language models, foundation models. Lots of those, Fusion, it's like probably on the order of Fusion. Like OpenAI has raised, $10 billion, and Anthropic's raised $1 bazillion, and I think a lot of money has gone into the foundation models. We're sort of the opinion that the foundation has been laid. It's unlikely that there are going to be a bunch more foundation models that are sort of like economically make sense for a venture firm to invest behind. So we're treating the foundation as mostly laid, and there's a lot of building to do on top of it. There's also been a lot of emphasis on large language models, right? On generating language, on generating chat, on generating this like new user interface and sort of UI. That's not really going to be enough, though. I think if our ongoing interaction with AI and language models is just chatting, I think we will have underutilized the technology. So with that in mind, we think that language models need to move into more of like an action-taking model. So And I think it's going to be very subtle. I think we can talk about AGI over here, but I think step by step, day by day, I think language models, even a Perplexity, is going to be able to take more action on your behalf. It's going to be more personalized because it's going to know all of your chat history and all the things that you've ever asked of it. So I think that will be a huge step in the right direction. Okay, taste matters. So software, like every company is a software company. Every company is going to be an AI company. And to some extent, a lot of that software is going to be commoditized. And I think like, just as like a batik fabric, I can see some in here. Like, there's like a good one, a great one, and you kind of have an eye for it. You can't really put your finger on it. You couldn't really explain it with words, but you kind of like know something when you really like it. I think software is the same. I think the subtleties of the design, sort of the way that you interact with the software is really, really going to matter. And that's something we pay a lot of attention to. I think one trend, actually, in software companies today is they're just hiring really good designers earlier. Okay, fourth, open source will catch up. I think this is actually good for everyone, because if Mistral and Llama under Facebook, if that technology can sort of roughly keep pace with OpenAI and be free, I think the level of innovation is going to be great. And I think we talked about earlier, like I really do think that AI is going to be globally distributed with sort of no favorites. Then, I mean, as far as Malaysia, I actually think some industries are going to be better served than others with AI. And you guys have a number like healthcare, agriculture, which came up earlier because we've been talking about potatoes, finance, government services. I think all of those are actually really well positioned for innovation. Okay, so this is an Easter egg. So those of you who read sci-fi or anyone who's read Ready Player One or plays video games, there's sort of this concept of like game designers will plant a secret. Okay, so this is my secret. There's been something on all the slides that's been shown, but I haven't talked about. If someone knows what it is, you can shout it out. But it's the people, right? So Emily's the CEO of Glacier, but I never mentioned her name. George from CrowdStrike, actually master handler of a crisis situation in the past couple of months. Brian from Coinbase. I did talk about Arvin from Perplexity. But all these things all fundamentally come down to the people. Yes. So here are my 5. Like, what are we looking for? Okay, so it all comes down to the people, but like, what do I do about that? So here are my 5 things that I look for, or that I think really, really stand out with founders. Okay, so number 1, I think they're observant. I think observance is actually an underrated characteristic. I think observant, and actually Professor Michael and I were talking about this, you have to be like tuned into your world, right? You can't, actually, I really admire that almost none of you are on your phones and laptops. Like, how are you supposed to internalize the world and sort of like know what's working and not working if you're not just like paying attention? So I think observant is actually underrated. Okay, number 2, what do I mean by founders who will make you cringe? I'll give you an example. So I took Arvind, the Perplexity CEO, to a Warriors game. He'd never been. Like 2 hours before, he texts me and he's like, hey, can you introduce me to Steph Curry? I'm like, no, bro, like, I don't know Steph Curry. Like, if I knew Steph Curry, I'd intro him to Nick, because Nick is obsessed with Steph Curry. But you know what? I admire that he asked. Like, if he was willing to ask me that, then he's probably willing to ask, like, Patronus for some big deal. Or, you know, I think you have to be willing to push the boundaries. Third, clever. Like, I do think if you're just going to do the same thing that everyone's done the same way all the time, like, you're not really going to have some, like, fundamental breakthrough. So I think cleverness. Okay, this next one, ship product with alacrity. I think that we could also call this day one, which is from Vikram earlier. We could probably call this the like Andrew Grove from the semiconductors panel. But this idea of like you have to be fearful and like moving very quickly all the time. I think that velocity of shipping product is just like you have to stay ahead of your competition every day. And the last one, being on a mission. Like Michelle is on a mission. I don't know if you could, like your plasma going like blah, 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 blah. Like he mentioned it like 8 times. And I think if you weren't on a mission, you would have given up after the 3rd time. So the really wanting to will something to happen is critical. So with that, this is our founder of IVP. And when you used to ask him what our business is about, he would say, people, 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 people. And for all I know, maybe since that's just an etched drawing, maybe that's a batik little bow tie that he left us with. Thank you.